Hey man, here with Christian. Thanks a lot for the set and for being part of the channel. So, like, just some quick questions with you, so the people can get to know you a bit better here. So, you obviously, a guy has been around for a long time, and you have many people that look to you as a huge influence. And I just wanted to ask you about your biggest influences when you started out, and when you were a kid. Like, what made you want to start to DJ?
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Very happy to be back here in Brazil. My influences, I grew up in Frankfurt, Germany, and I have an older brother and older sister. And when I was 8 or 9 years old, they brought home mixtapes from this local club. And this was in the late 80s. The DJ who mixed those tapes was Sven Feth, actually. So when he was like 21 years old or something like that, when he was a youngster. So I basically grew up listening to mixtapes by Sven. And then later, when I became a teenager, I started clubbing at a very early age. And I went train spotting. I checked out Sven like every week when I could. And then I got into music. I loved it. And then I slowly became into DJing. And I went to university. And then, by some luck, I produced a few records that became very successful. And very fast, I would say within 6 months, I went from being a university student to an international DJ traveling the world. I mean, this was 27 years ago, a long time ago now. And it was really, really quick for me. And I got very lucky because I've been busy since I started, and I'm still busy now, and I still love what I do. You know, I live in Europe. I'm in Brazil now. I'm going to Chile next week, the week after to Australia, the week after to Japan. It's crazy, but it's definitely much more fun being an artist, being a music producer and a DJ than having a normal job.
Definitely, man. I can agree with you on that one. I dropped out of high school to make music too, so hope it works out one day. And you said about staying true since you were young ages, and you're still doing techno, which you have one of the biggest labels in the industry, which is Tronic. And last year, you guys reached the number of 500 releases, right? That's a lot of release. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think it takes to have such a huge label, making it relevant for such a huge time, you know?
Well, I've had the label for over 25 years, and it started very unprofessional. It started as a hobby. You know, I had a release like every couple of months. But I had some big releases quite early on, which also helped my DJ career. But then after some years, it grew step by step. And then I had some problems with the label as well. My distributors went bankrupt a few times. So I had some hurdles to overcome. But now the label is stronger than ever. And I have a very strong team, a very good label manager. That's super important. And we've released over 550 releases now, I think, which is insane. I don't think there are any other techno labels that have done that many. But yeah, the label is strong. We do a lot of showcases around the world. I'm doing a Tronic party in Australia next week and 2 in Japan a few weeks afterwards. And I think the main reason why the label is still around is because I never did the label for money. It was just a labor of love, a passion of mine. And my philosophy is still the same today as it was when I started it. The music that I release on the label has to fit into my DJ sets. So if I play it in my sets, I can release it. And if I like it, I'm up for releasing it. But I'm not going to sign music that I'm not going to play. It doesn't make sense for me. So, and it has worked. And the label is, it's one of the top selling techno labels. Whatever you call techno these days, underground-ish techno labels. And just very happy that people still appreciate the label, and the following is quite strong.
Yeah, very nice. As you said, whatever you call techno these days is something that it's kind of a follow-up for my next question, which is you've been around for a long time, and things changed a lot since you started out, even what techno is. But I wanted to ask you, what in your vision, what changed the most in the scene in general for like clubbing or the new generation? Anyways, what do you think has the biggest change in the industry?
Well, that's a complicated question because I have been around for a long time. I mean, when I started DJing, there was no techno. But when I started DJing, there was house music was around. House music was new in the mid '80s when I started DJing, and then in 1990 I got into techno, and it's gone through many transitions. It's like in the early 2000s, like 2005 to 2012. Everything really got slowed down, went down from like 140 BPM to 125 BPM because Richie Houghton started the whole minimal wave. But then that came and went. And now they have this hard techno. They call it hard techno, which is really the new EDM. It's EDM. It's like 170 BPM music with Barbie melodies, So like, I wouldn't really call that techno. But true techno and true house has always been around and will never go away. There might be moments like right now where honest techno might not be as big as it used to be, although I feel it's growing again. And like I said, I'm not doing this for the money, so I'm doing this because I love it. And I mean, like, I'm here with you now. We just finished a really, really good track in the studio, and that's proper techno. Yeah. And it's all about doing what you love.
For sure, man. I mean, like, for the real ones, if you really like music, there's no option of doing it for money. I mean, it's impossible to finish a track and even know if it's going to make money anyways, like, you have to listen to it and love it, and if you like it, maybe other people will like it too. If you don't enjoy it, then how can you expect people to enjoy it, right? So my last question for you is for the young ones, like, coming up, especially in this genre of techno, which is pretty hard these days. It's a pretty underground thing. So what would you think is the best asset for someone to have or to follow? Anyways, your advice for the young ones coming up to the scene.
Well, I think the most important thing that you need to have is passion. Because if you just want to make money, you're better off getting a job in a bank. Becoming an investment banker or whatever. I actually did that. I was an investment banker for 2 years and I hated it. But then I got lucky with my music productions and things worked out. But if you want to make it in this world, there's many factors that you need to consider. You need to make really good music. You need to be consistent. And I would not try to make too many different styles. I would try to focus on one style and push that really hard. And of course, social media is important. Everybody knows that. But also maybe building a fan base, building a community, having your own friends support you and having their friends support them. Building communities, I think, is a very good way of growing as an artist. And other than that, you need to be lucky, because there are many successful DJs out there, and for not many. There are not that many successful DJs out there, and there's hundreds of thousands of artists that are just as good, but they just didn't make it. So you need to be lucky, good, and you need to work your ass off. If you're lazy and give up after a year, it's not going to happen. This needs to come from your heart.
Yeah, man, that's it. And something about luck, which is I think is like important, is you also have to be prepared to be lucky, in a sense that, like, if you just think that luck is what's going to take you there, and for example, let me just say someone wants to release on Tronic and sees you in the streets on Amsterdam, for example, but they're not prepared to be lucky to see you and have a good track to give you, or anyways, like, have a pen drive there, which you've been in the studio for a year every day, and you be prepared for that moment. It's not just being lucky and wish that things happen, as you said, like, many good DJs out there, and it's just a hard scene nowadays, man. So thanks for being here. And I want to say
one more thing. I want to say one more thing. When you produce music, don't be afraid for rejection. Like, send your music to a bunch of labels that you think work. If they don't get back to you, don't take it personal. Send it again in a few weeks or a few months. Send music again. Be persistent. I know a lot of people in this industry. I also have my label, but I also still send music to other labels. And just last week, I got rejected. Yeah, it sucks, but you need to try, and you should never give up. You need to push, push, push.
Being rejected is what you're gonna be the most when you're making music. And now I just remember this story that you might not know, but I was once with Dinox, and I sent him my music, and he said, "Oh, you should send this to Christian Smith." And I was like, "Okay, can you send it over to him?" And he said, "Yeah, okay, sure." Then you sent it to him. He sent me your music. I mean, my music to you. And then you know what you said back? He said, "Oh, nothing wrong with the music. It just sounds a bit commercial." And I was like, what? I can't believe it, man. I'm going to make the most underground thing this guy ever heard, Yeah, and he said, yeah. And then maybe 2 years after, then I got the release on Tronic, and great. So yeah, that's a funny story, man. Thanks for being here. Christian Smith, everybody. And that's it. See you in the next episode.